What if everything you call normal food was designed in a laboratory less than a century ago? There was a time when breakfast meant eggs from the yard, bread baked that morning, butter churned by hand. Then came the factory, the assembly line, the scientist in a white coat holding a clipboard, and within 50 years, the entire human diet was rewritten. This is the story of how normal was invented, how a handful of corporations, 2 world wars, and 1 very clever marketing campaign convinced 3 billion people to eat food their great-grandparents wouldn't recognize. If you want the full story, the one they don't teach in schools, subscribe. It helps us keep this investigation alive. We live in the most well-fed era in human history, and yet we are sicker, heavier, more confused about what to eat than any generation before us. Walk into any supermarket, 30,000 products, bright boxes, health claims, low fat, fortified, natural flavor. Every label promises something, but nobody asks the question that matters most. When did this become food? For most of human existence, food was simple. You knew where it came from. You could see it grow, watch it spoiled, taste the season in every bite. There were no ingredients lists, no expiration dates printed in microscopic ink, no debates about whether butter or margarine would kill you faster. And then, in the span of a single lifetime, between 1900 and 1970, everything changed. The factory entered the kitchen, the chemist replaced the cook, tradition was branded as ignorance, and progress came in a box with a mascot on the front. This transformation didn't happen by accident, it was engineered. Not by a single villain in a boardroom, but a perfect storm, industrial innovation, wartime desperation, corporate ambition, and a public hungry for convenience. The modern diet wasn't discovered, it was invented. And once you see how it was built, you can never look at a cereal box the same way again. We dedicate hours of research to uncover what truly shaped our plates. If you value this kind of work, support it, subscribe, leave a comment, or share this story. We create the content, you keep it alive.
Let's go back, not to some romantic fantasy, but to the world as it actually was. 1895. A farmhouse somewhere in the American Midwest. The sun rises, not on an alarm, but on the rooster's crow. A woman walks to the henhouse, her boots leaving dark prints in the dew, gathers eggs still warm from the nest, their shells flecked with straw and earth. Her husband milks the cow, the rhythmic ping of streams hitting the pail a sound as familiar as his own breath. The children churn butter in a wooden barrel, their small arms aching, learning through the burn of muscle the alchemy of cream slowly thickening into something golden and rich. Bread is baked twice a week. The oven's heat is an event. Flour comes from the mill down the road, ground from wheat her neighbor grew, carrying the specific mineral taste of that year's soil. The pantry is a library of survival. Jars of pickled beans glowing like emeralds, crocks of sauerkraut bubbling quietly, smoked hams shrouded in muslin, dried apples wrinkling into sweetness. Everything they eat, they can name and trace back to a hand, a field, a season. Every meal is a living map of their immediate world. This is not nostalgia. This is biology, geography, and economy woven into one. For 200,000 years, human beings ate within this narrow, profound circle. Whole foods, minimally processed, locally sourced, not because it was a philosophy, but because physics and time demanded it. Food was context. You tasted the summer drought in the tough kale, the early frost in the sweetness of the carrot. And the body knew what to do with it. It recognized the compounds, the fibers, the fats. Digestion was a conversation with known quantities. But by the turn of the century, the threads of that circle began to fray. The locomotive's whistle replaced the rooster's crow for millions. Populations drained from fields into cities, into tenements and factory shifts measured by the clock, not the sun. Farmland shrank into the periphery. The factory worker home after 12 hours had no time to churn butter, no dirt yard for chickens, no grandmother in the next room to teach the precise salt brine for green beans. A new gap opened, a space between the field and the table, measured not in miles, but in understanding. A hunger for convenience born not of laziness, but of exhaustion. And into that gap, industry stepped, not with a boot, but with a salesman's smile. At first, it was innocent, necessary even. Canned beef for soldiers at Fort Sumter, saving them from scurvy. Gail Borden's condensed milk, a lifeline for infants in burgeoning, filthy cities. A loaf from the German baker on the corner, its consistency a small miracle for the seamstress with no oven. These were small mercies, modest bridges across the new gap. But convenience, once offered, creates its own necessity. It reshapes desire. The taste of the store-bought with its promise of saved time becomes its own flavor. By 1920, the American kitchen was a site of quiet revolution. The icebox, a humming monument to imported cold, replaced the root cellar's silent, earthy damp. Store-bought bread, uniform and soft, replaced the cracked, domed crust of the homemade loaf. And butter, real butter, the kind that held the faint, grassy taste of a specific cow's summer diet, now sat on the shelf beside something strange, something new. Margarine. It was not a food, but a feat, a chemical sculpture, colored yellow to mimic the sunlit pasture it replaced, made from hydrogenated cottonseed oil, a waste product of the ginning mills, emulsified, deodorized, and fortified with synthetic vitamins A and D. It was shelf-stable for months. It was cheaper. It was modern. It bore the sheen of laboratory certainty, a product of human triumph over nature's fickle, seasonal scarcity. And it was only the beginning. Because once you accept that food can be engineered, that its essence can be broken down into constituent parts, manipulated, stabilized, and reassembled, you have crossed a metaphysical line. You have entered a new realm. A realm where normal is no longer what the land provides, but whatever the factory, with its logic of efficiency and its gospel of shelf life, decides to manufacture.
The modern food system wasn't born in a kitchen. It was born in the logistical nightmares of war. World War I. Trenches stretched across Europe like filthy, open wounds. The problem was elemental. How do you feed millions of men in a frozen, muddy hole thousands of miles from home? The old rules of food, freshness, seasonality, perishability were a death sentence. You couldn't ship a crate of eggs to Flanders. You couldn't ask a private to churn butter between artillery barrages. So the military turned to the new priesthood, food chemists and mechanical engineers. And together, they stopped seeing food as nourishment. They saw it as a supply chain problem. Calories and protein became units of logistics, like bullets or boot leather. The solutions were ingenious and terrifying in their divorce from nature. Canning was perfected, sealing death and sustenance together in a tin coffin. Dehydration reduced a 50-pound sack of potatoes to a ghostly 5-pound powder that would come back to life with boiling water. Powdered eggs, a substance your great-grandfather would have stared at, uncomprehending, was it paint? Was it dust? Became his breakfast. The goal wasn't flavor, it wasn't nutrition, not really. It was indestructibility. Food that could survive months in the damp hold of a troop ship. Food that wouldn't spoil, wouldn't rot, wouldn't attract rats. Food as inert as a brick, but which could, with water, perform the basic function of keeping a soldier's body moving. And when the armistice was signed, the factories didn't fall silent.
They simply turned their guns. The target shifted from soldiers to civilians, from the trauma of the front to the anxieties of the new American home. Enter the food corporation as we know it. Kellogg's, General Mills, Nabisco, Kraft. These weren't farms with offices. They were empires of throughput. Their cathedrals were bottling plants and rolling mills. Their gospel was economies of scale. And their one radical, seductive promise: you don't need to know how to cook. We have already solved eating for you. Take breakfast, the first and intimate meal. For centuries, it was eggs from the coop, porridge from the fire, bread from yesterday's baking, real food cooked in real time. But in 1894, in the sterile halls of the Battle Creek Sanitarium, a man named John Harvey Kellogg invented cornflakes. His motive was not hunger, but a puritanical obsession. He believed bland, pre-masticated grains would calm passions and suppress sexual urges in his patients. Yes, really. His brother, Will Keith Kellogg, the businessman, saw a different kind of appetite. He added sugar. He created a mascot. Snap, crackle, and pop were sonic advertisements for the product's novelty. He marketed it directly to children. And within a generation, this fractured, sugared chaff in a box became the definition of mourning. The ritual was broken, and a new one was sold in its place. The pattern replicated like a virus. Bread, the ancient staff of life, was automated, pre-sliced by Otto Rohwedder's relentless machine in 1928, wrapped in wax paper and injected with chemicals to prevent it from ever returning to the earth from which it came. Cheese, a craft of aging and bacterial alchemy, became processed cheese food, a term coined because it legally could not be called cheese. It was cheese, unmade and remade into something smooth, shelf-stable, and perfectly mediocre. And then came the most profound substitution of all: fat. For millennia, humans cooked with and craved animal fats, butter, lard, tallow. They were precious. They carried flavor, delivered vitamins, provided dense energy. They were alive with complexity. But they had industrial flaws. They were expensive to produce on scale, and they went rancid. They were reminders of mortality. So, in 1911, Procter & Gamble, a company that had made its fortune selling soap, rendering animal carcasses into cleansing tallow, found a new use for a waste product. They introduced Crisco. The name itself was a marvel of marketing: crystallized cottonseed oil. It was the first fully hydrogenated vegetable shortening. Cottonseed oil, a toxic byproduct of the textile industry, was blasted with hydrogen atoms, a process that transformed its molecular structure, turning a liquid sludge into a solid, odorless, snow-white fat. It looked like lard. It acted like lard in a pie crust, but it cost pennies, and it sat on the shelf in all temperatures for years without change. It was immortal. The marketing campaign was a masterpiece of cultural engineering. Cookbooks, printed by the millions and given away for free, instructed a generation of housewives in a new culinary grammar where Crisco replaced butter or lard. It was advertised not just as a convenience, but as a purifier: pure, scientific, modern, cleaner than the messy animal-derived fats of their immigrant grandmothers. To use it was to be progressive. Within a decade, the cast-iron skillet seasoned with pork fat was a relic. Crisco was the future, sitting in a tidy white can. But inside that pristine can, something monstrous and new had been created. Hydrogenation forged trans fatty acids, a molecular shape so foreign to human biology that our enzymes, honed over millions of years, stumble before it, unable to properly process it. It became a permanent inflammatory resident in our cell membranes. The human body had no precedent for it, no way to handle it. That dissonance between the bright promise of the can and the silent chaos in the cell would not be understood for another 70 years. By then, it would be woven into the very fabric of normal.
By the 1950s, the physical transformation was complete. The modern American supermarket stood as a temple of abundance, its fluorescent aisles a manifesto in cardboard and cellophane. But a product needs a story, a reason to exist beyond profit. The real story of waste products, wartime expediency, and shelf-life obsessions would not sell. So the industry wrote a better one. Enter the dietary authority, the expert in the white coat holding a pointer before a chart, the government guideline, the food pyramid, the entire apparatus of public health messaging, now poised to anoint this new way of eating not just as convenient, but as correct. And who, quietly, funded the studies, sat on the advisory boards, and helped draft the language of these new commandments? In 1955, the nation watched as President Eisenhower, the hero of the war that had industrialized our food, suffered a heart attack. Panic, cold and tangible, seeped into the public mind. What invisible enemy could fell such a man? A charismatic physiologist named Ansel Keys had a compelling, simple answer. Fat, saturated fat, the very substance that Crisco and its progeny had been invented to replace. He stood before international conferences, pointer in hand, and presented his 7-country study. The correlation was clean, elegant, devastating. Nations that ate more fat had more heart attacks. The science, he declared, was settled. A villain had been found, and it was on your breakfast plate. There was, however, a ghost in the data. Keys had collected information from 22 countries. His published graph showed only the 7 that formed a neat upward-sloping line. When other scientists, years later, plotted all 22 points, the tidy correlation shattered. The line became a cloud. Greece and Italy, with their fat-rich Mediterranean diets, had low rates. Chile, with low fat intake, had high rates. The data was messy. The story was not. But by then, the narrative had hardened into dogma. The industry had its perfect villain and a glittering opportunity. If fat was the problem, then low fat was the cure, and they were the ones who sold the cure. And so began the greatest uncontrolled dietary experiment in human history. Low fat became a secular creed. Butter was exiled to the hinterlands of old-fashioned taste. Margarine, now fortified with plant sterols, took its place at the family table as an act of responsibility. Whole milk was seen as a reckless indulgence. Skim milk, a blue-tinted ghost of itself, became a virtue. The egg, a perfect capsule of nutrition, was demonized as a little cholesterol bomb. But fat is not just calories. It is texture. It is satiety. It is the carriage that carries flavor molecules to your palate. Remove it, and food becomes a hollow echo, a sensory disappointment. So the industry's chemists and flavorists got to work. The solution was sugar, and not just the spoonful in your coffee, a strategic, pervasive infusion. If you remove the fat from yogurt,
It tastes like sour chalk. Solution: add fruit jam, which is mostly sugar. If you remove the fat from salad dressing, it's bitter vinegar water. Solution: add high fructose corn syrup. Low-fat muffins, cookies, crackers, all needed a glue of sweetness to hold their sad architecture together, to make the mouth forget what was missing. Between 1970 and 2000, as the low-fat mantra reached a fever pitch, sugar consumption in America soared. It was the macronutrient hiding in plain sight, in the bread that wasn't sweet, the pasta sauce that tasted rich, the heart-healthy granola bar. The average American went from eating 120 pounds of sugar per year to over 150. The body, overwhelmed by this fructose tide, began storing it in novel ways, as visceral fat around the organs, a far more dangerous kind than subcutaneous fat. The rates of obesity, diabetes, and metabolic syndrome, the very plagues the low-fat doctrine was meant to prevent, did not decline. They exploded. But the corporations didn't pivot. They marketed. New brands were born in the halo of health. Snackwells became a phenomenon. The devil's food cookie cake, fat-free, sat in pantries by the box. People consumed them in double portions, believing in the green light of the label. The low-fat claim screamed. The high-sugar, high-starch, essentially a cookie truth whispered in the small print. And then, the masterstroke, the colonization of childhood. Tony the Tiger's They're Great, the Trix Brabbitt's Tragic Pursuit, Captain Crunch's Maritime Adventure. These were not just mascots, they were friends, heroes, comedians, beamed directly into the Saturday morning cartoon sanctuary. The cereal aisle became a cartoon landscape in 3 dimensions. The science of this was precise. By age 10, the average American child could recognize hundreds more brand logos than native plant species. They had seen over 20,000 food commercials, almost all for pre-sugared, processed products. Normal was being coded into their neural pathways before they had the critical framework to question it. This was not an accident. It was a supply chain for future demand. Hook them young. Build the palatal preference for hyper-sweet, hyper-salty, hyper-crunchy. Erode the reference point for whole, quiet foods. Make loyalty to a brand feel like a personal identity. And it worked with terrifying efficiency. By 1980, the modern diet wasn't just ubiquitous, it was invisible, the water in which we swam. The foundational question of human civilization, is this good food, had been replaced by a consumerist query: which one should I buy? The great marketing lie wasn't a single falsehood. It was the construction of an entire reality, where processed food was not a compromise, but an advancement, where the expert's voice and the cartoon's voice sang the same convincing song. These truths rarely reach mainstream media, for obvious reasons. If you believe more people should know what's behind what we eat, share this video now. One click helps spread real awareness.
Let's talk about what happened next. Not in the abstract language of statistics, but in the lived reality of bodies, of families, of the silent changes beneath the skin of entire generations. In 1960, the obesity rate in America was 13%. By the year 2000, it was 31%. Today, it's nearly 42%. A line on a graph that doesn't curve, it sobers. Type 2 diabetes, once a rare condition of middle age, now appears in children, their bodies aged prematurely by a diet of constant sugar. Heart disease remains the nation's leading killer, a grim punchline to 70 years of avoiding butter. Something went terribly, systematically wrong. But here is the deeper, quieter truth.
The damage was never just about weight. The modern diet changed us in ways we are only beginning to map, a slow metabolic rewiring. Our gut microbiome, a universe of trillions of bacteria, a forgotten organ we carry with us, evolved over millennia as a partner to whole foods. It thrived on fibrous roughage, on the polyphenols in bitter greens, on the diverse ferment of a seasonal diet. This internal ecology didn't just digest, it trained our immune system, manufactured vital neurotransmitters, sent signals of satiety or alarm to the brain. The modern diet is a famine for this world. Stripped of fiber, it starves beneficial bacteria. Loaded with emulsifiers, soy lecithin, polysorbate 80, it acts like a detergent, scrubbing away the protective mucosal layer of the gut. Artificial sweeteners, heralded as calorie-free saviors, appear to poison certain microbial strains. The result is not just an upset stomach, it is a state of chronic, low-grade inflammation, a persistent biological alarm that researchers now link to the meteoric rise of depression, anxiety, autoimmune disorders, and allergic diseases. The gut and the brain speak to each other along the vagus nerve, and that conversation has become corrupted, a line full of static. Then there is the lost knowledge, the unspooling of a cultural thread. Cooking was a language passed from hand to hand. It was the tactile grammar of kneading dough, the chemistry of caramelization understood in the nose, the patience to braise a tough cut into tenderness. Recipes were oral history encoded with place and memory.
When food became a product, that transmission was severed. By the 1990s, the average American spent less than 30 minutes a day preparing food. Home economics classes vanished from schools, deemed antiquated. The family dinner table, once a daily parliament, was increasingly replaced by the asynchronous glow of microwave buttons and individual trays. An entire generation grew up not knowing how to hold a chef's knife, how to balance acid against fat, how to listen to what a simmer tells you. They lost the deep somatic literacy of real cooking. And the industry framed this loss as liberation. Commercials showed smiling, free women in pantsuits saved from the drudgery of the stove by a frozen dinner in minutes. Empowerment was found in the time not spent. But what was forfeited? The rhythm of a shared task, the therapeutic focus of chopping, the pride of creating something that nourishes another, the understanding that food is not just fuel, but a tangible signal of care, a direct metabolic love. Meanwhile, the food itself became a specter of its former self. Tomatoes were bred for a leathery skin to survive cross-continental shipping, their genetic capacity for flavor sacrificed at the altar of logistics. Chickens engineered to grow breasts so massive their legs could buckle reached slaughter weight in 6 weeks, their flesh watery and bland. Strawberries, available in every snowy February, grew plump and red under artificial light, arriving beautiful, scentless, and tasting of faint water. We achieved a miracle of abundance and a tragedy of emptiness. And beneath it all, the land itself began to groan under the contract. Industrial agriculture demanded uniformity. Vast monocultures of corn and soy, the raw materials for that sugar and oil, required armies of pesticides, synthetic fertilizers, and irrigation systems draining ancient aquifers. Topsoil, that complex, living skin of the planet that took millennia to form, was eroding 10 times faster than it could be replenished. The system designed to feed us was mining the very foundation of future nourishment.
The true cost of a cheap, shelf-stable cookie was never reflected on its price tag. It was externalized onto our medical bills, our mental health, our fractured food culture, and our dying soil. The modern diet promised a paradise of convenience, abundance, and health. It delivered a legacy of chronic disease, ecological debt, and a deep, unnameable hunger for something it could not provide: connection to our bodies, to each other, and to the source of our food. And for decades, we mistook the symptoms for personal failure. We dieted, we counted calories, we bought the next healthy product, never seeing the larger system, the invented normal, slowly metabolizing us. But something is shifting. Quietly. Not with a roar, but with a murmur. Like an underground spring finding its way back to the surface after being buried under concrete. It started in the early 2000s, a few dissenting voices speaking from the margins. Michael Pollan, not in a lab coat but in a garden, writing a simple subversive commandment: eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Gary Taubes, a science journalist, doggedly revisiting the buried data, asking the heretical question: what if we've been wrong about fat for 50 years? They were not greeted as heroes, but as gadflies. Yet their questions were stones dropped into a still pond. The ripples spread. Slowly, people began to look at their plates not with guilt, but with forensic curiosity. They turned packages over, squinting at the ingredient lists. Why did bread need high fructose corn syrup? Why were there more than 20 ingredients in a simple yogurt? Why did their grandmother's chicken stew taste of deep, rich something, while the canned version tasted only of salt and metal? The questions themselves were a kind of awakening. Farmers' markets, once quaint relics, began to multiply, not as boutiques, but as necessities. People wanted to shake the hand that grew their food. They sought out the small baker with flour under his nails, the butcher who could explain the difference between grass-fed and grain-finished, the cheesemaker whose aging caves smelled of earth and life. It was a search for traceability, for a story they could believe in. The science, too, began to course-correct, grudgingly, incrementally. New studies, freed from the low-fat dogma, started to vindicate what tradition had always known. Saturated fat was exonerated from its singular role in heart disease. Dietary cholesterol in eggs was shown to have a negligible effect on blood cholesterol for most people. The intricate role of healthy fats in brain function and hormone regulation came into focus. In 2015, the U.S. Dietary Guidelines quietly removed its long-standing limit on dietary cholesterol. No fanfare, just a bureaucratic line deleted. A silent, seismic admission. We had the story wrong. And people, armed with new, old knowledge and a deep-seated skepticism, began to experiment, not with the zeal of dieters, but with the caution of archaeologists, carefully brushing the dust off something buried. They tried cutting out processed foods, not to be good, but as an experiment. What would happen if they just ate real things? They ate butter again and found it satisfying in a way margarine never was. They ate whole eggs, the yolks like liquid gold. They ate red meat from animals that had seen pasture and found it tasted of minerals and thyme. And something remarkable and yet utterly predictable happened. The constant static of hunger between meals quieted. Energy, once a commodity doled out by caffeine and sugar crashes, became a steady current. The mental fog that felt like a permanent weather system began to lift. Joints ached less. Skin cleared. For many, the numbers on blood tests, triglycerides, HDL, fasting glucose, moved in the right direction for the first time in years. It wasn't magic. It wasn't a new miracle. It was the body finally being given the signals it was built to understand, exhaling a sigh of relief after decades of confusion. This is not everyone, not yet. The siren song of convenience is still loud. The supermarket aisles still gleam with their promises. The economic reality means that for many, the most rational choice is still the processed one. But the conversation has irrevocably changed. People are waking up, not to a new restrictive dogma, but to an old forgotten agency. They are relearning that cooking is not a chore, but a craft, the last truly human act in the food chain. They are remembering that taste is information, and that deep, complex flavor is often a marker of deep, complex nutrition. This awakening is not a return to some idyllic past. It is a reclamation of something more fundamental, the right to question what we are sold, the understanding that normal is not a fixed point, but a story. And stories, once you see the seams, can be rewritten. We're rebuilding the forgotten story of human nutrition, but it only continues if you're a part of it. Subscribe, comment your thoughts, and suggest the next topic. This project exists because of you.
So what is normal? Is it the deep biological rhythm of eating within seasons, within the bounds of land and skill? Or is it the fluorescent hum of a 24-hour convenience store, its shelves stocked with edible artifacts that defy time and place? Is it the memory encoded in your great-grandmother's hands as she shaped a loaf, or the memory of a jingle for a snack cake you haven't thought of in 30 years? The truth this journey reveals is that normal was indeed invented. It was architected in boardrooms, validated by co-opted science, and sold to us with the potent promise of a simpler life. We accepted it not out of ignorance, but because we were busy, hopeful, and trusted the white coat and the shiny package. We traded mastery for convenience and were told it was a fair deal. But here is what the engineers of our diet failed to account for. Biology has a memory. It is written in the craving for crunch that is satisfied by an apple, not a chip. In the deep satiety that comes from animal fat, not from a lab-designed emulsion. In the gut's recognition of a fermented food, a conversation between microbes that predates factories. And culture has a memory too. It whispers in the instinct to gather around a table, in the stubborn appeal of a recipe scribbled in a margin, in the quiet pride of growing something, even just an herb on a windowsill. The modern diet reshaped the world in its image, but it did not erase the blueprint. Every time someone chooses a vegetable, not for its antioxidant content, but because it is in season and therefore tastes profoundly of itself, that is a restoration. Every time a parent teaches a child to cook a simple meal, breaking the chain of learned helplessness, that is a revolution. Every time someone looks at a product with 40 ingredients and asks why, that is an act of reclaiming sovereignty over one's own body. These are not grand gestures. They are quiet, daily votes. A rejection of the invented world in favor of the real one. Normal was a story told to us, a pattern imposed. But we are the storytellers. We hold the needle. And we can choose with each meal to weave a different pattern. One that connects us back to the land, to our hands,
to each other, and to the timeless signals of our own biology.
It won't happen in a day. It happens one real meal, one conscious choice at a time. The hidden plate is not about food. It's about memory, power, and what modernity quietly changed. If this story stayed with you, you're already part of this investigation. And people, armed with new, old knowledge and a deep-seated skepticism, began to experiment. Not with the zeal of dieters, but with the caution of archaeologists, carefully brushing the dust off something buried. They tried cutting out processed foods, not to be good, but as an experiment. What would happen if they just ate real things? They ate butter again, and found it satisfying in a way margarine never was. They ate whole eggs, the yolks like liquid gold. They ate red meat from animals that had seen pasture and found it tasted of minerals and thyme. And something remarkable and yet utterly predictable happened. The constant static of hunger between meals quieted. Energy, once a commodity doled out by caffeine crashes, became a steady current. The mental fog that felt like a permanent weather system began to lift. Joints ached less, skin cleared. For many, the numbers on blood tests, triglycerides, HDL, fasting glucose, moved in the right direction for the first time in years. It wasn't magic. It wasn't a new miracle. It was the body finally being given the signals it was built to understand, exhaling a sigh of relief after decades of confusion. This is not everyone, not yet. The siren song of convenience is still loud. The supermarket aisles still gleam with their promises. The economic reality means that for many, the most rational choice is still the processed one. But the conversation has irrevocably changed. People are waking up, not to a new restrictive dogma, but to an old, forgotten agency. They are relearning that cooking is not a chore, but a craft, the last truly human act in the food chain. They are remembering that taste is information, and that deep, complex flavor is often a marker of deep, complex nutrition. This awakening is not a return to some idyllic past. It is a reclamation of something more fundamental, the right to question what we are sold. The understanding that normal is not a fixed point, but a story. And stories, once you see the seams, can be rewritten. We're rebuilding the forgotten story of human nutrition, but it only continues if you're part of it. Subscribe, comment your thoughts, and suggest the next topic. This project exists because of you.